So what the ego does is it says you're a body, and it says that anybody else you love is a body. It's only interested in what the body can do. When I say the body, I'm including the emotional body as well. So it's what the body can do physically and emotionally. So it's a severe limitation on who we are. It's only a speck of who we are. In this lifetime, the body. In fact, the body is not even real. It's part of the illusion. So it's not who we are at all. And yet the ego concentrates and aims for love at the body level. It says, especially in our love relationships, it says that we can join at the level of the body, and it exalts that. But it really tries to avoid connection at the level of the mind. In other words, where the spirit lies, in the mind. So it says bodies can join, bodies can connect, but minds cannot. We all know these relationships. We've seen them before. I've seen many of them where, say, a couple stay together. They may be in the same house, even in the same bedroom. Further, even sleeping in the same bed. And yet, as far as vulnerability between them is concerned, as far as true connection of minds and hearts are concerned, there's nothing happening. So the form is kept to look like a relationship, but the content, which is the most important part, is left on the wayside. It's not addressed. And then we say we're still together in this relationship. But that's not love. Basically what that is really is love that's turned to hate. So most of us don't, if we're to be totally honest, we don't know what love is, because we're so fearful of letting go of what we think love is. In other words, of facing our vulnerability and of expressing our fears and looking at our dark side or looking at our mistaken identities. We're so fearful of all of that. We don't realise that what we're doing is we're blocking out real love. And the only way to get to that real love is to actually dare to become more authentic. Dare to have a look at the times where we're feeling a lack of peace, where we're feeling conflict, and observe that and allow spirit to reinterpret that. So what do we mean by a special relationship? We'll be using that term frequently during this program. Special relationship is the ego's idea of a conditional relationship. It's the type of relationship that it seeks to fill the imaginary hole in itself. Okay? So that's what a special relationship is. I talked about the ego wanting to fill this hole in itself. And this is all unconscious, so there's no guilt or shame involved in this. But what it does unconsciously is it seeks to fill the hole within itself with another person. That's what it does. It sounds terrible, but it's true. That's what it tries to do. So what happens is when two people meet, especially when they fall in love, there's two independent self-seeking egos join to extract from each other what they themselves believe they lack. And that's what the whole relationship is based on. And the way that they achieve this goal is to use conditions. Well, now we all do this. There's nobody on the planet that doesn't do this. This is the ego. This is the way we do it. So what we do is we draw lines in the sand with our relationships and we say, okay, this is where you can't cross. Okay? These are the conditions of a relationship. Here's a generic condition. If we're in a romantic relationship, is that my partner will not cheat on me. That's a common one, isn't it? And that if my partner does cheat on me, my love for them will end. Okay? So, hang on a minute. Love can't end. It's impossible for love to end. We are love. The only way love could end is if we were coming from the ego using this fictitious love. And then, of course, it wasn't love in the first place. It was just conditions seeking to be fulfilled. And then we call that love. Well, that's the special love that A Course in Miracles talks about, the conditional relationship. But in order to undo the ego and truly to be more authentic and find out who we are and the experience of true love, we need to look in all of our relationships, not just our romantic relationships, but all of our relationships, for where is the ego hiding for you in your relationships. Unconsciously, what the ego does in these special conditional relationships is the aim is to maintain our innocence at all costs, and we do this by making the other guilty in different forms. Now, the intent comes from being a victim, a sense that I deserve, so I'm going to take it from you. And like I said before, this is largely unconscious until we're courageous enough to look at what our intent is in our relating to others, especially significant others. So the goal of the ego in these special relationships is not love, it's to reinforce separation and guilt. Now, what we do in our relationships often is our happiness depends on them. In other words, to give you an example, in my early relationship with Tomas, I depended on Tomas to fulfill my happiness. In other words, I depended on him to make me happy. That meant that basically what I was saying to him, although I didn't say it openly, was that if you love me, Tomas, you will do what I want. Now, when you make that sort of a statement, consciously or unconsciously, what you're saying is that if your partner or your loved one doesn't do what you want and doesn't agree with you, they don't love you anymore. Or at least that's what you start to believe. That's what the ego begins to believe. And then, of course, what you do is you begin to separate, and then you begin to project guilt onto your partner and make them the bad guy. Earlier, we were talking about the ego being the only block to the awareness of love's presence. And that's quite literal. Most of us just couldn't live without the love relationships in our lives, not just the romantic relationships, but the relationships with our children, our parents, our siblings, our friends, and even our colleagues. The problem that we all have as an ego, as an uninvestigated or undone ego, is that we can't know love. That's a pretty heavy statement. We can't know love, we can't give love, and we can't receive love through the ego. Remembering that the ego comes from the law of deprivation. It is the law of deprivation. So its basis or its nucleus is fear, and fear is opposite to love. Although it's an illusion, it still seems to affect us in space and time. So it is important to look at the ego and love. And the fact is that we don't really know what love is. So on the spiritual awakening journey, if we're authentically following this, and that means that if our number one goal really is the peace of God and really is to wake up, then what we'll find is that our concept of love must change. Because as an ego, all of the love that we have sought, all of the love experiences that we've had, and I'll say probably not all but most, 99%, would have come from the ego's form of love. And the ego's form of love is hate in disguise. It's not love at all. It's based on separation and guilt. So what we find as we undo the ego is that the concept of love must change. The love that the ego has embraced as being real love has been conditional love. Even as children, if we think back to our childhood, most of our upbringing was conditional. We may not have been conscious of it, but we learnt to dance. We sort of learnt to make a false persona in order to please those ones we wanted to get attention from. And sometimes that attention wasn't always positive. Sometimes in different forms we try and get negative attention, by being ill or by being destructive in different ways, whatever would get us attention, and we would call that love. So in the special love, which is of the ego, what we learn as children is we learn anything but love. Now, nearly all of us were raised by parents who didn't really see us, couldn't see us for the innocent, holy, guiltless soul that we were. So therefore we made this false persona called the self now, with all of its mistaken identities, and that's what we're aiming to undo in the process of spiritual awakening. But in the making of this false self, in the making of the ego, the development of the ego, even as children here, there was the development of a great whole within the self, within the I that we think we are. We weren't aware of that whole, because what we did as an ego is we did what our culture or the world tells us to do, which is to fill it with every distraction possible. In other words, to keep ourselves so busy with the past or thinking about the future, or with distractions at the time being whatever they might be, arguments, conflicts, career, relationships, desiring different outcomes, hobbies, always keeping ourselves occupied in time, and I mean in time, so that we never do what the ego most fears, which is to drop into the now moment. Because in the now moment, that is that moment where we can't be empty at the same time. We can't go to the now moment and feel absolutely hollow and feel the emptiness of the ego, because the now moment is full in itself. So what's happened is that we've spent our entire lives, probably unknowingly, trying to fill this gaping hole that was created by the ego. And I guess the number one way we really try to fill that hole is through our relationships. Usually or often it's with romantic relationships, because they seem to be the biggest lure at filling that hole temporarily. But we also try and fill that hole with our relationships with our parents, or even as parents with our children, or with friends as well. But it just seems that the romantic relationship offers us an opportunity for the biggest ego hook, probably because it represents a form of love that the ego is most attracted to. There are 3 forms of love that we know about, 2 of which we really know about, and 1 of which we don't know too much about. But the first form is physical or sexual love. The second form of love that we're most attached to is emotional love. And the third form is conscious love. This third form of love, conscious love, is something that most of us have never experienced, because this is what we're heading towards as we undo the ego. This is where we open to the love within by extending the love within without. So we extend the love we are, even though we don't believe it at first, in quantum forgiveness to people and situations that have challenged us, that press our buttons. That's how we learn that we have that love inside. That's how that hole is gradually filled. But with the 2 other forms of love, which is physical and sexual love, and the second one being emotional love, these are the forms of love that the ego holds in most esteem, that places on its altar. The reason being is that these forms of love exalt the body. They make us think we're a body. They convince us that we're not able to escape the body. And they really plug us in very powerfully to seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. And that's a vicious cycle in our lives. And everybody's hooked into this cycle of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, because that's what the ego does, to keep us out of the now moment, to keep us out of the only place where truth lies, where love is. Earlier we spoke about being an unseen child. As an unseen child, we had this gaping hole within. And we sought during our childhood and into adulthood to fill that hole. Often with distractions, as I spoke about before, but more often with our relationships, and particularly our romantic relationships. So what we do, and we do this unknowingly, is that as unseen children, we grow up to be unseen adults. And that gaping hole is just as big. In fact, it's increased in size as we grow older. And what we do is when we fall in love with somebody else, we seek to use them to fill that hole. What we don't realize is they can never fill that hole, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to get something. And remember earlier in the program we were talking about the ego always wants to get, wants to have, it wants to become or avoid. These are all control mechanisms by the ego. Anything we try to get is not going to sustain us. It's going to just increase the hole eventually. So what we do in romantic love is we try and use our partner to fill that hole. And unknowingly again, what occurs is that we never really see our partner for who he or she is in the now moment. What we're seeing, and I'm speaking from the ego perspective, is what we're seeing what A Course in Miracles calls a shadow figure. So to give you an example of that in action, when I met Tomas in our early encounters in a romantic relationship, I didn't realize this, but what I was seeing was my mother. And so I wasn't really relating to Tomas how he is or was then. And I didn't really see him. What I was seeing my mother. I was reacting as if he were my mother in many respects. And I had a very difficult relationship with my mother. So what occurred was it seemed like to me that Tomas was the one that was giving me the challenges in the relationship, that he was the problem, that he needed to change. And even from the outside, some people would say that's what it looked like. But the truth was that as an unhealed ego, what was happening is that I was projecting all of my unhealed problems from my mother onto Tomas, and then wanting him to fix it, which can never happen. So most of us in our relationships and our romantic relationships are doing the same thing until we begin to look at our projections, until we begin in the now moment to see what the conflict, if there is a conflict, what is that raising within us, and what is that within us that we need to look at. Not to judge ourselves, not to condemn ourselves, but just to look at it with spirit, the universal inspiration. To allow the universal inspiration in that moment to look at it with us. Because a lot of this stuff that we see as outside of us, that we've believed that we're a victim to, when we wake up, we have to take those projections back. We have to look at those projections. And that's very uncomfortable, to be honest with you. It is uncomfortable. And all I can say about that is that it gets better as you go along. It gets better and better and better. And there's nothing to feel guilty about. And what we often do is that as we are reclaiming our projections, what we often do is increase our judgment of ourselves. And that's something to look at as well. So we don't want to increase judgment of ourselves. Just be conscious of that in looking at all of our relationships. So the special conditional relationship, what that is at its core is simply the substitute that the ego made for our original connection to God's love. So what the ego did is made the body and said, well, bodies can connect, but minds can't. And it did so it would keep us in this cycle. So we never ever get to see the true altar within, which is spirit. So we never get to encounter the true original love relationship that we had prior to that tiny mad idea, where we collectively as the one mind made a decision to experience something other than love, which is fear. And remember, it's all an illusion. So it is the substitute for God's love. And the awakening process is the remembrance of God's love. That is the awakening process. The fastest way to actually get there in time and space, right now, is to shift our goal from being the special conditional relationship to being what A Course in Miracles calls the holy relationship. And we call that, Tomas and I just call it the unified relationship. The unified relationship, of course, is one without conditions. And that's something that could be a little frightening at first, because we think, my God, if I have no conditions within my relationships, all hell will break loose. Well, that's not really true. It's just that you're going to be letting go control. In other words, ego will be letting go of the fear that controls a relationship. Now, as we let go or undo the fear that controls a relationship, guess what happens? Love reveals itself. Not the temporary, fickle and fragile love that we've known before, but a love that is eternal, right here in this life. A love that's absolutely indestructible. That's what we get to know as we embrace the unified relationship or the holy relationship. This is a process. It's not something we can just click our fingers and do overnight. It's a gradual process, and it's an incredible classroom for us. Remember, there's only one of us here in this dream. So it's an incredible classroom. It only takes one. It only takes you. It only takes you to change your mind. That means that it's a gradual change in perception. It's the withdrawal of trust in fear, which is the ego, to the deposit of trust in love, which is the divine, which is who you really are. The goal in the special conditional relationship is to have the ego's needs met. And remember, the ego's undivided mantra is seek and do not find. So, unconsciously, what it seeks to do is to separate and to make another guilty so that you can feel innocent. What's really happening is that your unconscious guilt is increased by engaging in a conditional relationship, in a special relationship. But that's the goal, is just to have our ego needs met. In other words, to fix our dream. That's the goal. It's unsustainable, and it can't be successful in any way, shape or form. And it does believe that love can turn to hate. It does believe that we can love somebody and that love can dissipate, that it can end. And that's impossible. Love can't end. Love is all there is. So in contrast to the special relationship is the unified relationship or the holy relationship. The goal is diametrically opposed. The goal of the unified relationship is to wake up. That's the goal. It's not to get our ego needs met. The goal really is to unlearn fear in order to reveal the love that we really are. But we can't see the love we really are until we learn to extend it to another. It seems like a challenge, but it's a miracle. It really is a miracle, and it works. So what the unified relationship does is it brings us back as close to the state that we were in time and space, to that of love before the idea of separation occurred. That's the purpose of the unified relationship. So what we're going to see as we engage in a unified relationship more and more is we're going to see and feel, in other words, we're going to experience the original relationship that we have with God. And I say that we have. It's not that we had, it's we have now. It's just that we've forgotten. And it's through the extension of ourselves to another that we learn that God's love was, is, and always will be within us. So the purpose of a unified relationship is for healing. It is for undoing our mistaken self-concept with all of its illusory needs. The ego's needs block us from experiencing love. In other words, from giving it and receiving it. And we can't know love until we're prepared to investigate and undo all of the values and beliefs that have governed our perception of love. The unified relationship gives us this opportunity to extend and to learn this. So our goal is to undo guilt and to wake up. And how we do this, it's gradual, it's a gradual process. It's through quantum forgiveness. It's in the now moment whenever our buttons are pressed. And they will be. It's about going again, going within, becoming the observer, and looking at our upset or our emotion or whatever it might be, or our fear, with spirit, and then offering quantum forgiveness in that moment. Ask to see it differently. This is how we transform our relationship in the now moment every time our buttons are pressed. It's not something that's going to happen in the future. It's going to happen right now, as soon as we're confronted with any feeling of loss of peace. So the way we do it is really what we do is we see another's needs as not separate from our own. That's the key. See, that's very different than the conditional, special relationship. We don't see another's needs as different from our own. We're only interested in getting our needs fulfilled, if we're to be honest, in the special relationship. In the unified relationships, these are the ones where we really are practicing seeing another's needs as not different from our own. And it's in experiencing that, it's in offering forgiveness every time our buttons are pressed, that we realize that we're extending love. That's how we know that we are love. It's by actually extending it, or extending quantum forgiveness, in spite of feeling angry or resentful or frustrated or whatever it might be. It's in those moments when we just overlook the other's error. That is when we're extending love. At first, it may feel odd, it might feel like it's insincere or a strain or whatever. But if we persist with it, we will know the miracle. In other words, we'll experience the miracle. Because what will happen is that hole, that gaping hole that I was speaking about before, that has been with us since the separation, we find that that hole is beginning to fill. But it's beginning to fill not by getting something outside of us or by becoming something else. It's filling through our extending. It's filling through our giving. So, see, cause and effect are reversed here. We learn that giving is receiving. That's how we learn that we always were love, that we are love and will be love forever, forevermore. That's how we begin to learn and to experience in the undoing this idea that we really have no needs that are not fulfilled. We can't know that until we actually extend it, until we give it. And the perfect people are right here, right now in our lives. And those people you know personally. They're your children, they might be your parents, it might be a colleague, it might be a partner, it might even be yourself. It might be yourself that you need to extend this forgiveness to.
So when Nouk and I met, right at the top of this program, we told you about that wonderful pink light that we experienced on the beach. And you know, for all that good intention that we had from that point on, as we mentioned, as our relationship deepened, it actually headed south. It got worse. It was a special relationship. It was a conditional relationship. I didn't realize it at the time, but certainly I looked to Nouk to complete me. I believed that part of her role was to make me happy, was to meet my needs. All the things that she mentioned just before, I had to tick them all off. That was where I was in the relationship. And then as we started undoing the ego, what occurred was that Nouk had the courage and was the first to look at what aspects of our relationship were special, and she withdrew that specialness from it. I perceived that there could be loss here, and so tried to exert greater control over the relationship. And I think we said before, we learn through contrast, and during that period of the undoing of the ego, through the conversion of our special relationship to a unified one, what I learned was that when I was exerting control, when I was still trying to manipulate, when I raised my voice, when I tried to use anger, all it did was left me feeling more alone. And of course, I was pushing Nouk further away. And then I had to look at it and say, now here I am supposedly saying that I love you, and I'm acting like this, and I'm pushing you further away. Clearly, this is not love. So in the undoing process, and you might like to try this yourself with your relationships, is to actually do some journaling about what is this relationship for? How are you using this relationship? That's an awful thing to ask, using, but let's get real. How are you using it? Do you use it for intimacy? Do you use it for finance? Do you use it for security? Do you use it for sex? Do you use it for companionship? Do you use it for housework? Well, I used it for all the above and more. But what I started doing was, when I was feeling fearful and scared, I started journaling. And it was interesting. It was interesting because first I discovered what a great liar I was. Because the first 3 pages of journaling clearly indicated that the reason for my upset was Nouk. So then I'd keep journaling because I knew that wasn't the truth. And the next 3 pages would reveal that there were all these other things, but they were all roundabout linked back to Nouk. So I knew that still wasn't it. And then gradually, with persistence, there comes that point. We all know that point. It's that breaking point. It's that point of release. It's that point of surrender. It's the point where I realized, oh my goodness, all of the control that I'm trying to exert is purely because I'm scared of being abandoned, because I'm scared of being alone. And then I also realized that I also felt guilty now for trying to exert that control, for losing my temper, etc., etc., etc. And ultimately the ego was saying to me, now you see, how could you ever expect love anyway? Look at all of this. But the strange thing was that moment of surrender, that was the key in the journaling. Because it was that moment of letting go of the chair again, you see, and allowing the universal inspiration to whisper to me the truth. It was in that moment that I actually felt peace. And then I recognized that in that moment when I felt that peace, when I could surrender, when I could offer up, when I could own up, I realized then that what I wanted above all else was our relationship, to be close to each other, regardless of what Nouk did or didn't do in the relationship. And so I had to surrender all of that over. And the crazy thing and the interesting thing, and you may have experienced this yourself, or you may be about to experience this yourself in one of your relationships. But as I gripped that chair tightly, the ego chair, the voice was screaming at me saying, don't own up to anything, because that will give her all of the justification she needs to leave you. And yet, there was this other quieter voice that was saying, let go of your control, let go of your expectations, and recognize there is no Nouk. What Nouk is representing at this point is offering you the opportunity to release your dysfunctional self, to let go of your ego self, and to learn true love. That turned everything around, because I recognized that as Nouk was withdrawing her specialness, what was really happening wasn't that she was withdrawing love. She was calling love forward in me. She was giving me the opportunity to hand over my so-called shameful bits, those parts that were too scared and too guilty to be raised to the surface about my fear of abandonment, my need to control, etc. Parts that seemed so shameful that they couldn't even be spoken about, could be raised to the light. And what was the trust contract that I signed with Spirit? Well, what it was this. At first, I thought that it was about releasing parts of myself so that I could have Nouk. And I recognized, hang on, that's an expectation right there. That's not why you're doing this. Why are you doing this? But it wasn't until I let go and then I recognized through Spirit's guidance that the letting go was so that I could reclaim myself. So what was happening was that Nouk was giving me the opportunity to reclaim myself. That was the truth. How wholly different and opposite to what my ego was telling me, which was that I was in danger of losing a relationship if I give up control and conditions. And in that transition, when I let go of the chair and then was transported through that new perception to the peace of God, I recognized that I lost nothing. When Nouk and I let go of specialness, when we made the commitment to discover love, when we said, let's let go of the form of the relationship being marriage, so that we can truly learn love in freedom, I discovered myself. The funny thing that happens there then is that instead of the special downward spiral of a relationship, which is about trying to get from each other, which only leads to anger and hate, in offering each other freedom, in offering each other not just freedom, offering each other the acceptance of each other as they are, for who they are, without judgment. What happened for me is that I developed a gratitude to Nouk for withdrawing the specialness. And so in that space of gratitude, I naturally just want to give. And in naturally just wanting to give, recognizing this other truth, which is that giving is receiving. When we're grateful, all we want to do is give. We have no thought or consequence about receiving anything. The opportunity to give is all we want. And what happens then is that the relationship is transformed into a holy relationship. The holiness isn't about the gratitude and love for each other. The holiness is about that we each mirror to each other that they are wholly innocent, regardless of what they might have done. In the conversion of our special relationship to the holy relationship, I was faced with a choice. There were several acts that I had committed that I thought were too shameful to admit. They were part of the conditional contract at the very start. Nouk might have mentioned one of those that's typical is, if you cheat, ... Well, I did. And for years I had to hold on to that horrible shame, and I recognized that it was the ego's way of sabotaging me to make sure that I could never have love, because now I could never admit it. But when Nouk and I joined in a holy instant, where we looked at each other and said, you know what, we want to know about love and to love each other regardless, and to renew, if you like, that vow that we made back in 1984. It offered the opportunity for both of us to once again clean up our relationship entirely by revealing everything, all our private thoughts and deeds. The deeds were my cheating. The private thoughts between us were about how we were using each other and how we had expectations of what each other should be doing for each other. And in that moment of joining, you see, what happens is that Spirit joins with us then and takes all of that dysfunction away and shows us that in fact nothing happened, that we are wholly innocent still. And what I saw in Nouk, in her overlooking of that, was my own innocence, and that's what bred the gratitude. And the same for Nouk, because what happened is that as she looked at me, and eventually as I got with the program and realized, wow, it's not that you're withdrawing love from me, you're withdrawing specialness from me, and I thank you. What happened is that Nouk experienced being seen for the first time. In the same way that I experienced being seen for the first time, because I could own up to everything about myself and still not be judged. From that moment on, we had turned our special relationship around to a holy relationship. One that's about forgiveness and the extension of love, and about mirroring back to each other that all the time we are wholly innocent. You see, we are each other's best teachers. In your life, you have people right now who you may consider a pain in the ass, a pain in the backside. In fact, they are your teacher. Be grateful for them right now. And it's about handing that relationship that you have right now over to Spirit and allowing Spirit to reinterpret it for you. And then you will see clearly, this is not a relationship that's here to hurt or harm you or give you a hard time. This is an opportunity knocking at your door. In fact, this person is your ticket home. When we say home, home to yourself. The added benefit for me is that Nouk and I are still as close as we are today. But that's not the reason we do it. That's not the purpose of the holy relationship. The purpose of the holy relationship is to help each other to wake up, to see the other person's needs as our own. So even though we feel threatened, we support the other person, who they are, what they want, regardless. Because we recognize that the other person's business, whatever they're into, is actually none of ours. Our only business is to love and to extend forgiveness. And not this world's forgiveness, as we've said before, but the kind of forgiveness that overlooks the whole issue. Nothing happened. You're perfectly innocent. This is when we experience being seen. The thing about a unified relationship is that it's not special. And what that means is that all you want to do now is extend it. It's not exclusive. All that we want to do now is to continue to extend that love outwards. Wherever we can, the opportunity to shine the light into anyone else's soul, to say you are wholly innocent, is all we want. Because because it's in their receiving it that I receive it, that we receive it back.
We've prepared several exercises here for you, and the objective is to help you to unearth where the ego sabotages your relationships. This can save you a lot of time and a lot of conflict. So stay with us, and with pen and paper, just write these questions down. And when you have time, please answer them. And when you answer them with radical self-honesty. Because the more honest you can be, the deeper you can look, the faster you can recover from suffering within your relationships and within your life. So the first exercise is in relation to how we need others in our life. In other words, to give you an example, in the earlier relationship with Tomas, in our special conditional relationship, I needed Tomas to make me feel secure. That was one way that I needed him. So when we say we need somebody, or when we feel we need somebody, whether they be a lover, a partner, a child, a parent, whomever, what we're really saying is that we're using them. So we can equate the word need to the word use. And this sounds terrible, but it is important to actually look at wherever we need somebody. That's where we're attached. That is where the ego is right there waiting to sabotage us. So the best thing we can do is to shine the light on that. It doesn't mean we need to change anything. We just need to look at it. That's where the miracle lies, in looking at it with the universal inspiration. So the first question is this. In relationship with each of your loved ones, your partner, your child, parent, or friend, identify where you feel you need them, physically or emotionally, or perhaps financially. Just list the ways for each of your loved ones. List the ways that you feel you need them. And then when you've done that, have a good look with spirit at how you could see that you use them in this way. Without guilt, without shame, and without judgment. Just look at it. This is very, very helpful. The next exercise is this. Find out where the ego sabotages you in relationship. So this means we're asking you to review your relationships with your significant others. Maybe choose one and list the patterns of conflict that you repeatedly fall into. Is there something that always seems to happen to you in your relationships? What is this? See if you can find a pattern. This is another way of allowing the light to come to the ego, so you can see where your ego gets you stuck in your relationship. The next exercise is to discover your hierarchy of relationship conditions. And often, many of the conditions that we enforce in relationships are unconscious. I didn't know many of mine until I began the journey of shifting our relationship goal from a special relationship to a unified relationship. So this exercise is asking you, firstly, what conditions do you apply in your relationship? What are they? In every area, financially, physically, sexually, emotionally, just have a really good look. What are the conditions that you apply in your relationship? What lines do you draw in the sand? Okay. And the second one is, of these conditions, name one or perhaps two that, if not kept or if broken by your significant other, would cause your love to diminish for them or to end. is an important exercise to have a look at where you draw your lines in the sand, where you think love can end. And then ask yourself, can love really end? Another helpful question is to ask, whose business are you in within your relationships? Byron Katie often speaks about there's only 3 kinds of business. There's my business, your business, and God's business. But what we seem to do, especially with our significant others, is we try and rescue them from breaking down in order to break through. So when a seeming crisis occurs, what we do is, from the ego perspective, is we try to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. In other words, that's the chance that Tomas and I had, was to try and put Ricky back together again. In other words, to try and put Ricky's ego back together again. That is what the medical model were trying to do as well. And often what we're challenged to do as we're undoing the ego is to not rescue another. Of course, if somebody needs help, we go in there and help them. But we need to go to Spirit to ask what's really helpful and what is not first before we rush in. Because if we're really helping somebody from fear, we need to look at our intent. If it's from fear, then is it really helpful? Of course not. So are you saving any significant others from a seeming breakdown? Could you be denying them a potential breakthrough? So just have a look at that. The next question is, what do you realize about your relationships from this program that you've been listening to so far? What have you realized so far? Just have a look at that, again, without judgment, shame or guilt. Just look at what you've learned. So an example may be that you have realized that with your significant other, that you have placed some unreal conditions on that relationship, and that that's not really coming from the true space of love, and that you may want to review those conditions again. That might be one example. Another example might be that you realize you've placed special expectations upon your child, one of your children, or all of your children, that now in the light of Spirit you see are unreasonable, and you may want to change those. So just have a look at what you've realized now about your relationships, be they with your partners or parents or children or whomever might be your significant others, from this program so far. You are closer now to identifying where in your relationships you hold others as responsible for your happiness. Are you willing now to release them from this responsibility? If yes, then which relationship issues, which fears or conditions are you prepared to offer over to Spirit for healing and reinterpretation? With these questions, you may want to go through and listen to them all, and you may want to actually pause at each question or those significant questions that you wish to answer and answer them. Or you may wish to go through the entire questions and listen to them all, and then when you have time and some alone space later, just complete those questions when it feels right. I think the biggest hurdle in the spiritual awakening process, in other words, the biggest hurdle to transferring our trust in the ego to trust in Spirit, are the blocks to awakening. How much don't we want to wake up? That's what we've got to look at. How much do we resist waking up? Another way to put it is, what's in the way? What is it that we desire more than the peace of God? Not just overall, but every minute, because we're making thousands, if not millions, of micro decisions every day. Most of those we don't consult. We don't go to the observer. We don't go to the decision maker in our mind and ask, okay, I'm going to make this decision with spirit. What we do is we automatically go to ego until we can generate enough willingness and the desire to undo the blocks to awakening. So it is important to actually acknowledge the blocks to awakening first. I'm going to read you a quote from A Course in Miracles. It's a short quote. It's from the text. And this quote says this: "To learn this course requires willingness to question every value that you hold. Not one can be kept hidden and obscure, but it will jeopardize your learning. No belief is neutral. Everyone has the power to dictate each decision you make. For a decision is a conclusion based on everything that you believe. It is the outcome of belief and follows it, as surely as does suffering follow guilt and freedom, sinlessness. There is no substitute for peace. What God creates has no alternative." So we have a few exercises here that you may want to do again when you're ready. You may want to listen to them now or do them later. And the first of these questions is, how much don't I want to wake up? In other words, what do you desire more than the peace of God right now? Is there anyone, is there anything or a situation that you desire more than the peace of God? For example, financial security, love in your relationships, your purpose, self-love, perhaps maybe your body or your health, your emotional wellness. Is there something in any of those that you desire more than the peace of God, more than to wake up? And the next question to ask yourself is, why do you want it? And the second question is to ask, what do you think that it will give you that awakening will not? These are important questions to ask. So what do you desire more than awakening? More than the peace of God? One thing that I really desired more than the peace of God for most of my life was to be right. And then I realized that that's what most egos want. They want to be right. They want to defend their beliefs and their values. So have a look at all of those attachments, beliefs and values. See which ones of those that you're still clinging to, that you still want more than to wake up. And again, this is not a guilt trip. This is not to make you wrong or bad. This is just to bring the illusions to truth. Right? We need to bring the darkness to the light. We can never heal it unless we do. So other than what we desire more than awakening, we also need to look at the opposite, or seeming opposite. What is it that you're trying to resist? What is it that you're trying to avoid in your life? In other words, what is it that you really, really fear? Anything we try to avoid is going to come under this classification, being what we desire more than truth. That sounds strange, doesn't it? Whatever we fear is actually a desire. It's a desire more than waking up, desire more than the peace of God. Whatever we fear or try to control without spirit will act as a block to our awakening. So have a look now and see if there's anything or anybody or perhaps a circumstance in your life that is causing you concern or suffering. Is there anything that you feel that you need to control right now, independent of spirit? Some examples might be our children, our partner, perhaps maybe our body, our health, an illness that we're trying to heal. It could also be our finances, our career, our purpose. Just have a look. What do you feel you need to control without spirit? What is it that you really fear? Another important question here. Is there anything or anyone from your past that still pushes your buttons in the now? To give you an example, I felt that as a child I was abused, emotionally abused. And I held on to that for many, many years. That was part of my mistaken identity until I began to wake up and saw that it was a burden and a block to the awareness of love. So if there's anything from your past, like a belief that you were abused, or a belief that you were treated wrongly by somebody, that you were a victim of a circumstance that occurred, or perhaps even that you feel a victim of God in some way. Look at that, because this is very important to look at. Because whatever we believe was real, we're carrying into the now moment. These are present blocks to the awareness of love now. In other words, our ability to receive love or give love, and our ability to see the divinity that we really are. Because anything that we believe is real, in other words, if I still believed that I was victimized by my childhood, then I wouldn't be able to forgive that, because you cannot forgive something you think is real. It's impossible. So that's why quantum forgiveness calls for us to actually see that it didn't really happen, and that it came from a projection, an unconscious projection from our own ego, that there are no victims. We were never a victim. And that's how we're able to give that willingness to spirit to forgive, because it never really happened. So we're forgiving somebody for something they didn't do. That's quantum forgiveness. Quantum forgiveness is very different to traditional forgiveness. Traditional forgiveness is a judgment. It's not real forgiveness. Quantum forgiveness remembers that there's only one of us here in this dream. Only one. There's only one. So if I perceive attack from you, what I do is I remember that ideas leave not their source. In other words, this attack that I seem to be experiencing comes from my projection. It comes from my split mind, my ego, that's projecting the unconscious guilt in the form of unconscious self-attack on you, so that the ego can blame you for whatever it is that happened. So the ego can make the separation real, so that I never wake up from the dream. So let's go on to another valuable exercise here. This exercise is asking you, where in your life are you meeting this resistance? In other words, where are you actually consciously looking at what seems to cause you suffering, what seems to be causing you to be a victim in your life? So of the areas that seem to cause you suffering, which of these are you moving toward to meet? Which of these are you moving toward to face and look at with radical self-inquiry? And secondly, which are you actively avoiding or resisting? Just be honest. All this exercise is to do is to raise your awareness so that you can see where the ego is hiding. Again, not to have to change, but to just lift it to Spirit's awareness. And thirdly, upon inquiry, which of these can you do something about? So is there something that's causing you suffering in your life, but you can do something about? At the level of form, at the level of world, you could do something about. In other words, to give you an example, you've got a ton of bills piling up on the table, but you do have, if if you really looked at it, you do have the finances to be able to take care of those bills as they're coming in. If you really looked at it, what's stopping you could be the absolute fear and terror that there may be too many bills for you, so you're not looking at them. And which of these issues are calling to be accepted and reinterpreted by Spirit in your mind? In other words, which of these issues, once you really look at them, do radical self-inquiry, which of those issues are you willing to give over to the universal inspiration? To go into not knowing, go into the void with Spirit and just saying, okay, I don't know what to do. I'm awaiting your guidance.
So in this session, we've looked at the development of trust, the holy relationship, and we've also asked you to look and answer a series of questions. It's important to say this to you. Don't answer those questions alone. Invite Spirit in with you to give you the strength and the courage to look at what it is that you need to look at. And remember that it's all about your freedom. It's all about actually establishing your guiltlessness. It's all about establishing your innocence. But first, we have to raise everything to the light. I'd like to congratulate you for taking the courage to actually look at this, for being open-minded enough and open-spirited enough to dare to look and question areas which may have lain in the darkness for a long time. In the next and final session, we're going to be looking at the happy dream and the 6 stages of the development of trust. You'll be able to see how all the stories that we've told you up to this point and the examples that we've given you fit into those 6 stages of the development of trust, which equate to the 6 stages of undoing the ego, which equate to the 6 stages of awakening. And we'll conclude with a couple of very powerful meditations to take you to that place where you can experience your unified self, to give you the confidence to carry on with this program and your own personal undoing.